everyone. It's still me, Christine, your auditing theory conversation partner, and you are still in the audit report playlist here at Let's Talk Audit and Assurance. Now, just to provide a very brief recap of what happened in the first lecture video that we had in this playlist, we were able to identify the two different types of frameworks, namely the compliance framework and the fair presentation framework, wherein we have correctly identified our PFRS or IFRS to belong to the fair presentation framework. In that lecture video as well, we introduced the different types of opinions, namely the unmodified opinion, which we call the unqualified or clean opinion, which we give to our clients if the financial statements are fairly presented. We also talked very briefly about the modified opinions, namely the qualified opinion, which the auditor will give in case the financial statements are fairly presented, except for either the effect of a material misstatement or a scope limitation that is the effect of which is material but not pervasive. We also talked about the adverse opinion, which the auditor will give in the case of financial statements that are not fairly presented. And then we talked about the auditor's version of a no comment, which is the disclaimer of opinion, which the auditor can only give in cases where the effects of a scope limitation are both material and pervasive. We then proceeded to look at the contents of the standard unmodified report, which is outlined in PSA 700. And we ended up with a promise that in the next video, we are going to talk about emphasis of matter and other matter paragraphs. So here we are. In order to make good that promise, we're finally going to talk about the additional paragraphs in the auditor's report. And our main basis and our main inspiration for this is actually PSA 706 revised. Now, at the very start of this discussion, allow me to remind you that these additional paragraphs do not have the power to change the auditor's opinion. So by virtue of that, while we place these paragraphs in order to emphasize or highlight something, it cannot change our opinion. Thus, this will only result to a modified report, but not necessarily a modified opinion. So we already know that these additional paragraphs may come in the form of an emphasis of matter paragraph or an other matter paragraph. So let us first talk about the emphasis of matter paragraph. The emphasis of matter paragraph draws the user's attention to items found in the notes or in the financial statements. Just like what we have mentioned, this will not modify the opinion, and the matter to be emphasized should not be a key audit matter. If you would recall our previous discussion, when an item is mentioned under CAM, it should be mentioned only under CAM and should not be the subject of either an EOM or an OM. But the most important thing really to remember about emphasis of matter paragraphs is that they highlight something, they emphasize something that is found in either the financial statements or the notes to the financial statements. Now, according to our standards, here are the circumstances where emphasis of matter is needed. Firstly, when a financial reporting framework has been prescribed by law or regulation, but it would have been unacceptable except for the fact that it was prescribed by law or regulation. In other words, there is a financial reporting framework that, wouldn't have been acceptable, but we have no choice because the law requires the client to use such. Now, if you have ever come across a complete set of financial statements, then you would notice one of the first few notes in the notes to financial statements that you will find there will actually describe the financial reporting framework that is being used by the client. Ergo, if you wish to highlight what framework is being used by the client, the correct additional paragraph to use is an emphasis of matter paragraph. Another instance where an EOM is needed is to alert the users that the financial statements are prepared in accordance with a special purpose framework. Now, not yesterday, in the previous video, we talked about compliance framework and fair presentation framework being general purpose frameworks, right? But this time, when you talk about the special purpose framework, it is a framework intended for a specific purpose. Think, for example, of financial statements prepared under the tax basis of accounting, or financial statements prepared under the cash basis of accounting, or even financial statements that are prepared according to the provisions of a contract. So, this framework is intended only for a specific set of users. So, again, similar to the first instance we have here, when you wish to highlight the framework being used by your client, an EOM is what you need. Another instance is in the case of subsequent events, which will become the topic of our discussion for the next playlist about completing the audit. But when facts become known to the auditor after the date of the auditor's report, and the auditor provides a new or amended auditor's report, the auditor will use an emphasis of matter paragraph to highlight the note in the financial statements that contains a description of the said subsequent events. There are also other circumstances where an EOM might need to come into play. Examples would include in the case of significant uncertainties, which the auditor may wish to highlight. However, allow me to clarify or qualify rather my statement. When we talk about significant uncertainties, there is a thin line that divides significant uncertainties from multiple uncertainties. In the case where there are multiple significant uncertainties, the auditor may deem it more appropriate to issue a disclaimer of opinion instead, rather than simply highlighting it in the notes, right? Or highlighting or emphasizing it by way of an EOM. In this case, we acknowledge that we are not simply talking about significant uncertainties, but multiple significant uncertainties. Again, in that case, you better issue, or the auditors would consider issuing a disclaimer of opinion instead. But if it's not multiple, in the case of significant uncertainties, an EOM would suffice. Another will be if the client has adopted or has opted for the early application of new accounting standards where permitted, or in the case, for example, of a major catastrophe, again, that the auditor wishes to highlight or emphasize, or the subsequent discovery of fact that affects the auditor's opinion. Now, these things may warrant the use of an EOM provided that these are adequately disclosed in the notes to financial statements, taking into consideration again that an EOM highlights something in the notes. So for these to be a subject of EOM, they must be adequately disclosed in the notes to financial statements. All right, so that will be for emphasis of matter paragraphs. Let's now move on to other matter paragraphs and what is the difference between an EOM and an OM. Now we recall an EOM highlights something that is found in the notes. An other matter paragraph is used when the auditor wishes to highlight something that is not found in the notes. So, instances where the auditor considers it necessary to communicate a matter other than those that are presented or disclosed in the financial statements that, in the auditor's judgment, is relevant to the user's understanding of the audit. Say, for example, you would like to highlight the fact that the previous year was audited by another auditor. Or maybe you would like to highlight the fact that in the case of comparative financial statements, the previous year was actually unaudited. Or you would, for example, like to highlight the fact that you would have withdrawn from the engagement, except that you were not allowed to do so, and because of that, you simply issued a disclaimer of opinion. So notice that these things all relate to the audit process or the auditor's role or the auditor's responsibilities. So if what you wish to highlight is not found in the notes nor in the financial statements, then the other matter paragraph is the more appropriate choice. According to our standards, here are the circumstances in which another matter paragraph is needed. In the case, for example, of a material inconsistency between the financial statements and other information, which by the way we'll discuss in detail in the upcoming videos. But when you talk about material inconsistency between the FS and the other information, and the amendment is needed in the other information, but then the client will not amend the other information, since we do not actually give an opinion on the other information, we only give an opinion on the FS, right? So we can't modify our opinion on the FS because the FS is correct. So what do? We may wish to highlight this material inconsistency by including another matter paragraph in our audit report. Another instance is in the case on the reporting of comparative financial statements, like what we mentioned just a while back. Like for example, if the prior year FS was audited by another auditor and you would like to highlight that fact, or when the prior year FS was unaudited, but take note, even if you use an other matter paragraph to highlight that the prior year FS was not audited, this does not relieve you of the responsibility to audit the beginning balances, all right? Then, in the case as well of other matters that would affect the presence of other auditors in the comparative financial statements. Now let's try to apply some of these concepts to a multiple choice question. And the question is, which objectives of the auditor is or are being met by the inclusion of EOMs and OMs? So letter A, form an opinion on the financial statements based on an evaluation of the conclusions drawn from the audit evidence obtained. Letter B, express clearly an opinion through a written report that also describes the basis for the opinion. Letter C, include a clear cut statement of the nature of the audit and the degree to which the auditor limits his or her responsibility. Or letter D, draw users' attention after having formed an opinion by way of clear additional communication in the auditor's report. Now, before we reveal the answer, and I think you already know the answer to this, please take note that all of the four items listed here are part of the auditor's objectives, or is part and parcel of the auditor's objective in performing an audit of financial statements. But what we are being asked for is which of these objectives is being met by the EOM and the OM. And of course, the answer to this is letter D. It draws users' attention after having formed an opinion by way of a clear additional communication in the auditor's report. Let's take a look at another statement or another question. You are the auditor of the University of San Jose Recoletos. Upon your objective assessment, you expect to include an emphasis of matter paragraph and or an other matter paragraph in the auditor's report. What should you do? Letter A, ensure that matters giving rise to both additional paragraphs are appropriately disclosed in the notes to financial statements. However, reading letter A, we would get to remember that only an EOM requires a highlight to a note disclosure, right? An other matter paragraph does not necessarily or does not highlight something found in the notes. Letter B, check the key audit matters section to ensure that matters giving rise to both additional paragraphs have been properly included there. But then again, we remember that if an item is part of CAM, it should not be the subject of an EOM or an OM. So it's not letter B either. Letter C, communicate with those charged with governance regarding this expectation and the wording of the paragraph. Or letter D, communicate with management and those charged with governance regarding this expectation and the wording of the paragraph. So I guess the question now is, should you report it to TCWG only, or should you include management in this communication? The correct answer is letter C. When you talk about additional paragraphs like the EOM or the OM, the auditor should communicate with TCWG regarding the expectation and the wording of the paragraph. So the answer is Charlie. We do not include management in this communication. Another question. Matters that are determined to be key audit matters in accordance with PSA 701 may also be, in the auditor's judgment, fundamental to users' understanding of the financial statements. In such cases, in communicating the matter as a key audit matter in accordance with PSA 701, the auditor may wish to highlight or draw further attention to its relative importance. The auditor may do so by, so essentially the question is, how do you highlight a CAM? Now, we know EOMs and OMs are intended to highlight certain things, right? EOMs to highlight things that are found in the notes, OMs to highlight things other than those found in the notes. But the question is, how do you highlight a CAM? So if you would remember our discussion in the previous video, if you wish to highlight a CAM, you may do so within the key audit matter section, because an item that is part of CAM should not be the subject of an EOM or an OM. So it will be presented as a key audit matter only, and the auditor will then have to decide on the arrangement of the key audit matters to ensure that the said matter is being highlighted. So the answer is Charlie. There may be a matter that is not determined to be a key audit matter in accordance with PSA 701. For example, because it did not require significant auditor attention. So again, segue, I hope you would remember what we discussed in the previous video about considerations as to when an item is to be considered as a key audit matter. Part of which is that it requires significant auditor attention, or that it requires significant management attention, which then required significant auditor attention, or or significant risks, right? But which, in the auditor's judgment, is fundamental to users' understanding of the financial statements. So it does not qualify to be a CAM, but in the auditor's judgment, it is fundamental to the user's understanding. If the auditor considers it necessary to draw attention to such a matter, the auditor includes the matter in letter A, an other matter paragraph, letter B, an emphasis of matter paragraph, letter C, the basis for opinion paragraph, letter D, the other reporting responsibilities paragraph, or letter E, the notes to financial statements. So in this case, if it is fundamental to the user's understanding of the FS, it's very important, fundamental to the user's understanding of the FS. Therefore, what the auditor will need to use is an emphasis of matter paragraph. If the statement were to say if it is fundamental to the user's understanding of the audit, then we would have used another matter paragraph. But in this case, what we want to highlight is fundamental to the understanding of the FS. So therefore, the financial statement. So therefore, go for EOM. Okay. Now, what if a new Philippine financial reporting standard that has affected the accounting for property, plant, and equipment has been approved for financial statements ending December 31, 2020, with provisions allowing for early adoption? Now, your client, a listed entity in the manufacturing industry, has decided to adopt the change for its financial statements for the period ending December 31, 2018. So, your client is an early adopter. Okay, so your audit report will most likely include letter A, an other matter paragraph, letter B, an EOM, or emphasis of matter paragraph, letter C, a key audit matter section, or letter D, an other reporting responsibilities paragraph. So in this case, we have a client who has decided to go for early adoption of a PFRS, and this early adoption will most definitely be disclosed in the notes. So if you link this one to your FAR, to your financial accounting and reporting, and your theory of accounts, then you would know that this is to be disclosed in the notes. And if you wish to highlight something that is found in the notes, definitely it's going to be an emphasis of matter paragraph. In the rare circumstance when the auditor is unable to withdraw from an engagement, even though the possible effect of an inability to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence due to a limitation on the scope of the audit imposed by management is pervasive, you may consider it necessary to include letter A, an other matter paragraph, letter B, an emphasis of matter paragraph, letter C, a key audit matter section, or letter D, an other reporting responsibilities paragraph. This time, what the auditor wishes to highlight is the fact that the auditor would have withdrawn but is not allowed to do so. So, in that case, it has something to do with the audit, not necessarily the financial statements or not directly the financial statements. So, highlighting something that is fundamental to the user's understanding of the audit is going to use another matter paragraph. We highlight that through the use of an OM rather than EOM. So, the answer is alpha. All right, another question. Your client prepared financial statements specifically for distribution to its bankers. However, the financial statements were still prepared using the general purpose framework because the intended users have determined that such general purpose financial statements meet their financial information needs. So this is an example of a restriction in the distribution of the report. So while the framework used is still general purpose, but the report is restricted for distribution. So in this case, the auditor may consider it necessary to letter A, include an other matter paragraph stating that the auditor's report is intended solely for the intended users and should not be distributed to or used by other parties. Or letter B, include an other matter paragraph stating that the auditor's report is intended solely for intended users by indicating the positions and names of the people expected to receive a copy of the report and should not be distributed or used by other parties not named in the report. So, comparing letter A to letter B, it would seem like letter B would like for us to include more details, particularly the names and positions of the people we expect to receive the report. Or letter C, include an other matter paragraph stating that the auditor's report is intended for the company's bankers and as such is prepared using a special purpose audit framework. Or letter D, do nothing. Maybe this at this point, this is one of the most favorite things we would like to do, right? Doing nothing seems to be such a luxury these days. But anyway, letter D, do nothing. This is an acceptable and usual practice. So when financial statements prepared under the general purpose framework is being restricted for distribution, then most definitely we cannot just do nothing, because we do need to highlight the fact that it is restricted for use. And we recognize as well that while only the bankers are expected to receive this, the framework used is still general purpose. So therefore, we cannot say letter C. So the answer now is between alpha and bravo. Should we state in our other matter paragraph that it is intended solely for the intended users and should not be distributed or used by other parties? Or must we name the intended users by indicating their positions and names of people expected to receive a copy of the report? Now, in this case, the auditor should only include another matter paragraph stating that it is intended solely for the intended users. We are not going to name the people we expect to receive the report. We are also not going to indicate their positions. We're simply going to state that this report is intended solely for the intended users. No need to give the details. It will be management's responsibility to ensure that only those they wish to provide the report to will be given a copy of the report. From the auditor's side, we simply state that it is intended solely for the intended users. So that should be alpha. Here we have four statements. Statement one, the subtitle Report on the Audit of Financial Statements is unnecessary in circumstances when the second subtitle, Report on Other Legal and Regulatory Requirements, is not applicable. This one relates to the previous video, actually, when we talked about the subheadings, right? And we said whenever the auditor has other regulatory requirements and the subtitle Report on Other Legal and Regulatory Requirements appear, then it will also trigger the appearance of the report on the audit of financial statements right before the opinion section. So therefore, on the statement that the subtitle Report on the Audit of Financial Statements is unnecessary when the second subtitle is not applicable, then the answer to this is true. So without the second subtitle, you don't need to place the first subtitle. Statement 2. An emphasis of matter paragraph may be presented either directly before or after the key audit matters section based on the auditor's judgment as to the relative significance of the information included in the emphasis of matter paragraph. And this is also true. The only requirement we really have is that the EOM, even the OM, should not appear before the opinion paragraph. Okay, so it should not precede the opinion paragraph. And the basis for opinion will always follow the opinion paragraph. So by virtue of that, no, so the emphasis of matter paragraph may appear after the basis for opinion paragraph. So statement 2 is true. Statement 3. When the emphasis of matter paragraph relates to the applicable financial reporting framework, including circumstances where the auditor determines that the financial reporting framework prescribed by law or regulation would otherwise be unacceptable, the auditor may consider it necessary to place the paragraph immediately following the basis for opinion section to provide appropriate context, and this is also true. Like what we mentioned, it should always be opinion first, followed by basis for opinion. Whatever additional paragraphs you may have next, you may place it after that. But normally it would depend on which section you would also wish to highlight, no? But then it's general, not generally, but it should be opinion first, and then basis for opinion, then the other paragraphs in other sections of the report, wherever you deem it necessary to be placed. Statement 4, where the inclusion of an other matter paragraph on a particular matter in the auditor's report recurs on each successive engagement, the auditor may determine that it is unnecessary to repeat the communication on each engagement unless otherwise required by law or regulation to do so. And this is also true. Take note that this only happens if the matter covered by an OM paragraph recurs on each successive engagement. Okay, so no need to unnecessarily repeat it on each engagement. So statement 4 is also true. Now, a while back, particularly when we talked about statement 3, we're already looking into the placement of the EOM and the OM. And we did mention that it should not be before the opinion paragraph. And so therefore, at the very minimum, it should appear after the basis for opinion paragraph. Now, why can we not give a fixed placement for the EOM and OM? Because according to PSA 706, the location of these additional paragraphs will depend on the nature of the information. Okay, so therefore, we cannot really identify a fixed placement because it will depend on the nature of the information that the auditor wishes to highlight. The only requirement really is it should never precede the opinion paragraph. Example, if the EOM relates to, or if what you wish to highlight relates to financial reporting framework, position it immediately after the basis for opinion paragraph. But if there is a CAM, okay, if there is a CAM, the EOM may be placed either directly before or after the CAM based on the auditor's judgment. Consider providing further context on the heading, such as, for example, emphasis of matters dash or dash subsequent event. Meaning to say, if there are a number of EOM paragraphs, then you may wish to provide context by putting it in the heading or in the subtitle of the EOM itself. No, kung sa Bisaya pa, butangag apelyido. No? So, for example, EOM dash subsequent event. In the case of OM, if there is a CAM, again, provide further context to the heading, such as other matter dash scope of the audit. If the OM relates to other reporting responsibilities, then include it in that section where you have talked about the report on other legal and regulatory requirements. Okay. If relevant to the entire report, then it is presented after the report on the audit of financial statements and the report on other legal and regulatory requirements, meaning to say, the first subtitle that we have, report on the audit of financial statements, that will have the opinion, the basis for opinion, etc., etc. Then you will have the subtitle, report on other legal regulatory requirements, then the paragraph contained in that subtitle, and then you will have the OM. Okay, if it is relevant to the entire report. So presented after the two sections. All right. So that's it for EOM and OM. Again, please be reminded that the placement of those additional paragraphs do not have the power to modify the auditor's report. And with that, up next, we're finally going to talk about the modifications to the auditor's report. And as what we have previously mentioned, when the auditor modifications to the auditor's opinion, I'm sorry, and once what we have previously mentioned, when we modify the auditor's opinion, it will also yield to a modification in the auditor's report. So stay tuned for the next video. Up next will be modifications.